who are doing this work. So I was talking about slaughterhouses, so that's another kind of course. I guess I'll get back into that for a second. But we won't be there too long. But you know, people, we naturally, I think, are hardwired to have empathy. And when we see somebody else hurt, we sort of naturally feel that hurt. And when somebody's working in a slaughterhouse where all they're doing all day long is hurting and killing others, they have to sort of cut off that humane part of them, that empathy, and begin doing many other bad things. You know, slaughterhouse workers sometimes take that brutality home, and it's an ugly world. And unfortunately, this violence can jump the species barrier. Cruelty to animals oftentimes relates to cruelty to people. Violence is violence, and violence, unfortunately, can become the norm. And on factory farms today, violence is the norm. But human beings are very social animals. We tend to do what those around us do. We learn from those around us. So people that work in slaughterhouses see bad things happening, and they're encouraged to do bad things, and then they start rationalizing, justifying, and normalizing bad things. But I think a lot of those people really don't like what they're doing. I mean, how could you? How could you get pleasure out of such violence? And so, you know, our movement is not about condemning people. It's, I think, love the sin or hate the sin is a good sort of mantra. And I think of people like Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, with understanding there could be no hatred. Or Gandhi, who talks about how the goal is to bring people to their senses, not to their knees. You know, good people sometimes, and in fact often, do bad things. And our hope is that we can provide alternatives and show a different way. And that's what Farm Sanctuary is about. That's why the Adopt a Turkey program started back in 1986. It was a way to deal with a holiday. It was very hard for vegetarians. You know, this national holiday celebrated around the carcass of a dead bird. So we came up with a different idea. Let's celebrate the lives of these animals instead of their deaths. And I think there's something that's inherently, people inherently like that. You know, there's, I think, more joy in life than in death, more joy in giving and supporting others than in extracting and in killing others, which is what this whole factory farming business is about. But, you know, in this movement, animal people can sometimes feel a little bit righteous about our position. And so it's also important for us to recognize that, you know, even the most vegan is not perfect. And when we first started doing this work and we were rescuing animals from dead piles and taking them to the local veterinarian, the veterinarian was a little bit surprised that, you know, we were spending so much money to take care of animals that were economically worth very little. And so they looked at us in a kind of funny way, and then they looked at us even more funny when one day we found a sick rat on the farm. And we called the veterinarian and said, we have this rat that's in pretty bad shape. We think he's probably going to have to be euthanized. Can you look at him? And they kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit, and they finally agreed to look at the rat, and he was in bad shape, and they euthanized him. And then a couple weeks after that, our sheep had parasites. They had worms. So I called the veterinarian and I said, we have this worm here. And there was a long silence on the other end. And the vet kind of said, well, okay, what do you want us to do with the worm? And the worm was a parasite. So we wanted to find out what sort of medication to give to the sheep to treat them for these worms. So, you know, the point is that, you know, in living, we're going to cause harm. But we should live in a way that is as conscious as possible, and I think does as little harm as possible. And doing that, you know, makes us feel good too. You know, kindness to others really enriches ourselves. And how we treat other animals actually, I believe, says more about who we are than about who the animals are. You know, Gandhi said you can judge the moral progress of a nation by its treatment of animals. And when it comes to farm animals, that rings so true to me, and the more I'm immersed in these issues, the more obvious it is. You know, these animals are completely at our mercy. We mass produce them, we control every aspect of their lives, and if we treat them with no kindness and no mercy, that says something about us. And in this industry, that's become the norm. And in how we eat in our country, also, bad has become normal. We eat in a way that is supporting enormous cruelty, and and most citizens, when they hear about it, don't like it. So people are unwittingly supporting this factory farming abusive system. So then one of the responses is, well, I don't want to see it, I don't want to know, don't tell me about it. So then people live in this sort of state of denial, in this cognitive dissonance between their own basic empathy and desire to live humanely. And I think most people want to consider themselves as humane and compassionate. I mean, there's a few miscreants perhaps that are proud of being cruel and mean, but not too many. That's the rare individual. Most people want to be compassionate. But